Questions of Doom. Hello, welcome to another Questions of Doom. In this series, I attempt to answer any questions that you send my way using the archaeosoup@gmail.com email address as displayed on the channel homepage, or actually at the end of this video. Now today I've been sent a question from a gentleman who has called himself ESP10, and ESP10 has a fairly straightforward question. In fact, it was very, very, very simple, the email. Archaeosoup, can you tell me if archaeology is ever hazardous to your health? It looks as though it might be. Yours sincerely, ESP10. So, ESP10, short and swift was that question. And you're right, actually. Archaeology can be, oddly enough, hazardous to your health. It doesn't necessarily immediately look as though it might be, because often you see beardy blokes in jumpers or similarly clad women, or in fact often lovely people as well. Sorry, I hate to be stereotypical. Gathering around essentially a pit and just sort of going, what's in there? And it doesn't really look as though it's very dangerous, but actually it can be. And there are several incidents, actually, which I'm aware of, but also which have been discussed since I announced this video on the Archaeosoup Facebook page. One of them is actually, quite literally, I know someone who was on an excavation where somebody went off for a tea break and never came back. And what happened is they'd fallen into an open trench, and it had collapsed on them and they had died. And it's horrible, but it's true, apparently. This is possibly because they'd made their trench too deep, and you know, now there are very strict guidelines on how to maybe step out a trench if you're going down very far, so that it doesn't collapse in on you. But that's one of the slightly dark comedy aspects, I suppose, of archaeology. Is that can happen. One of the things that was mentioned on the Facebook page was when Stonehenge was being examined initially, one of the sarsen stones fell over and squished someone who was examining them. So you know, that's a very real risk, a monument literally squishing you alive. So you know, that's some of the less amusing ones, as it were. Not that that's amusing, but you know what I mean. Some of the less slapstick ones are actually to do with chemicals and the risk posed by ancient biohazardous remains, as it were. So, for example, the Spitalfields excavations in London quite often actually there was a risk of ingesting in some way human remains, because they were so well preserved, and sometimes in lead-lined coffins. And this actually occasionally happens even with Roman remains, that what you find inside is actually a soup, essentially, which if you were to touch it or get any in your eye, you could become very, very ill very, very quickly. Essentially, there's been no way for the remains which have rotted to dissipate, so that can be a bit nasty. Personally, actually, I was once involved with an excavation where I gained mild arsenic poisoning. This was because actually we were excavating in South Shields, no, North Shields, sorry, and the digger that I was supervising with JCB was, you know, squishing back all this spoil essentially from the top of what was going to be the excavation. And then eventually we got down to the excavation, and I was being asked essentially, I was essentially asking the guy rather to stop every now and then, because sometimes there might be a skull in the JCB bucket, so I'd pluck it out. And but he was being very enthusiastic, as was I, and I got splashed with water. And the next day I felt a bit ill, very nearly didn't go into work, but I did. And what happened was I was looking horrible, very, very pale. The person who was running the excavation decided that they should take me to hospital, and they did, and it turned out it was arsenic. And this was actually because some of the burials that were being uncovered had essentially been pumped full of arsenic as part of the embalming process. The Victorians liked their corpses often to go on display for a while, and this involved them looking lovely and pale and serene. So if you pump them full of arsenic, it not only embalms them, but it also leaves them with a a sort of a Queen Elizabeth I sheen. So yeah, I got arsenic poisoning, and apparently I would have been dead within days had they not identified it. And only recently, actually, has my immune system got anywhere near to being something like what it was. So yeah, that's a very real thing. And also, the guy who was running that excavation was made sterile by archaeology, believe it or not. He was excavating an old, basically a Romano-British well, which had been filled in over time. Apparently, it had been filled up with votive offerings. So it must have started out life as some sort of place to take stuff and deliver it to the gods by dropping it down the hole. And he was down there with this a tea light on his head, as it were, on his helmet, and it was all very, very wet. He was up to his waist in this wet material, and you couldn't really tell what it was in the light. So he turned on another torch just to make sure he wasn't anywhere near anything sharp, and he noticed that the walls were silver, liquid silver. And this is because someone, a couple of thousand years ago, chucked mercury or quicksilver down the hole, and he was up to his waist in liquid mercury, and that rendered him unable to have any more children. Thankfully, they'd filled their allotted quotient, as it were. They wanted only quota, rather not quotient, quota. They only really wanted 2 kids anyway. So essentially, it was like a free vasectomy, but that's again a very, very real risk posed by excavation and archaeology. So the short answer, ESP10, is yes, archaeology can be hazardous to your health. The literal physical risks, being buried alive, being squashed by a monument, and also just the chemical aspects. Often you're dealing with human remains, and often these remains are either hazardous by virtue of being essentially decomposed or decomposing flesh, or hazardous because of what we've done to them after they've died, or sometimes people just like to throw highly toxic metal down wells. So yes. So there you go. Hopefully that answer has been interesting or useful to you. And this is really the reason why I answer these questions via video, is because hopefully they're interesting to more than just the person who asks the question. So, thank you very much for your question. It was a very good one and gave me an opportunity there to wax lyrical about my arsenic adventure. And thank you. So, if anyone else has any questions, feel free to send them my way. In fact, I received a very interesting question this morning, which I shall be responding to soon. And until next time, thank you very much.